Captain Jake Morrison had what you might generously call confidence, what you might less generously call stupidity. He swaggered through the docking bay of Nexus Station like he owned the place, which he absolutely did not, considering he was 3 months behind on his ship payments and currently surviving on instant noodles and sheer audacity. Nexus Station was the galaxy's premier trading hub, a sprawling metal cathedral where every species in known space came to buy, sell, and occasionally get into diplomatic incidents over parking spots. Jake had been here dozens of times, and he still acted like he was the first human to discover fire every single visit. "Another day, another credit," he muttered, adjusting his jacket that had seen better decades. The thing was held together by hope and industrial-grade fabric patches, but Jake wore it like it was made of spun gold. The station's main concourse buzzed with activity. A family of crystalline Zephyrians tinkled past, their bodies catching the artificial sunlight like living prisms. 3 Gorillian traders stomped by in formation, their tusks gleaming and their cargo containers rattling. Jake nodded at them all like they were old friends, which they weren't, because most of them actively avoided him. That's when he saw her. Vera Blackwood stood at the central information kiosk, and Jake's brain immediately downshifted into what he liked to call charm mode, which was really just regular mode with more smirking. She was human, thank the stars, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and clothes that screamed, "I am not here for your entertainment." More importantly, she was alone. Jake had a policy about approaching lone humans in space stations. Actually, he had a policy about approaching any attractive woman anywhere, which was essentially go for it, and see what happens. This policy had gotten him slapped on 17 different worlds and banned from a casino on Rigel Prime, but Jake was nothing if not persistent. As he got closer, though, he noticed the signs. Literal signs. Small, discreet warning labels attached to her jacket, her bag, even her boots. "Do not touch" in 17 different languages. "Maintain safe distance" in galactic standard. Seriously, just don't in what looked like handwritten English. Jake's response to warning signs was typically to treat them as suggestions. Speed limits, radiation warnings, do not enter signs at government facilities. They were all just the universe's way of testing his resolve. These little labels struck him as particularly adorable, like she was trying to play hard to get on an industrial scale. "Excuse me," he said, sliding up to the kiosk with what he considered his best smile. "I couldn't help but notice you're new here." "Jake Morrison, Captain of the Wandering Det. That's my ship, not a philosophical statement, though I suppose it works both ways." Vera turned to look at him, and Jake felt his smile falter for just a moment. Her eyes were the kind of blue that made you think of deep ocean trenches and unexplored space. Beautiful, but with an edge that suggested looking too long might not be healthy. "I'm not new here," she said simply. "And I'm not interested." "Well, you haven't heard my pitch yet," Jake replied, his confidence rebounding like a rubber ball. "I'm heading to the Outer Rim territories, premium cargo run, very exclusive. Could use someone with your obvious sophistication to help with negotiations." "I don't negotiate," Vera said, turning back to the information display. "I don't trade. I don't socialize. I exist, and I strongly recommend you do the same at a distance of at least 6 feet. Jake laughed, because of course he did. 6 feet? What are you, radioactive?" Vera's finger paused over the display screen. "Something like that." "Come on," Jake said, stepping closer. "What's the worst that could happen?" The question hung in the air like a challenge to the universe itself. Vera turned to face him fully, and for the first time, Jake noticed that other people in the concourse were giving them a very wide berth. Not just wide, they were practically taking detours to avoid their general vicinity. "Captain Morrison," Vera said, her voice carrying the kind of patience usually reserved for explaining quantum physics to houseplants. "I'm going to say this once, and I need you to really listen. Those signs aren't decoration. They're not a joke. They're not me playing hard to get. They are warnings designed to keep you safe, healthy, and in possession of all your original body parts." Jake grinned wider. "Body parts? Now you're just trying to sound mysterious." I'm trying to sound serious, Vera replied, but clearly subtlety isn't working. So let me be direct. Do not touch me. Do not brush against me. Do not even think about that traditional human greeting where you grab someone's hand and shake it like you're trying to restart a stubborn engine. Or what? Jake asked, because he was apparently determined to speedrun his way to whatever cosmic punishment awaited him. Vera looked at him for a long moment, then sighed. Or you'll find out why I carry so many warning signs. The station's AI, Morris, had been watching the interaction with the sort of morbid fascination usually reserved for traffic accidents and political debates. As an artificial intelligence, Morris prided itself on logical thinking and rational decision-making, which made its current situation particularly frustrating. Vera, Morris said through the nearest communication panel, its voice carrying the subtle electronic undertones that marked it as non-human. Perhaps you should simply leave. Again. I'm not running away from another station, Morris, Vera replied, still watching Jake with the wariness of someone who'd seen this particular disaster movie before. I have business here. What kind of business? Jake asked, because apparently he'd missed the part where this was a private conversation. The kind that doesn't involve cocky space traders with more ego than sense, Vera said. Morris made a sound that might have been a sigh if AIs could actually breathe. For the record, Captain Morrison, I have been monitoring your biometric readings since you approached Miss Blackwood. Your heart rate is elevated, your pupils are dilated, and you're displaying all the classic signs of what humans call not getting the hint. I get hints, Jake protested. I'm great at hints. I just choose to ignore them. That's not how hints work, Morris replied. Miss Blackwood has been a resident of this station for approximately 3 weeks. In that time, she has not touched another living being, has not removed her warning signs, and has not engaged in what you might call social interaction. There are reasons for this. What kind of reasons? Jake asked, his curiosity officially overriding his already questionable judgment. Before Vera could answer, the conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Grok, the station's head of security. Grok was a Thacarian, which meant he looked like someone had crossed a rhinoceros with a particularly angry tree. His species was known for 2 things, their incredible strength and their absolute commitment to following safety protocols. But Captain Morrison, Grok rumbled, his voice like rocks arguing with each other. You are standing too close to a Category 7 anomaly. Oh, what now? Jake asked. That would be me, Vera said dryly. Apparently I rate somewhere between a solar flare and a collapsing star on the cosmic inconvenience scale. Category 7 anomalies require a minimum safe distance of 6 feet, Grok continued, consulting a tablet that looked comically small in his massive hands. Current distance, 2 feet, 4 inches. It's fine, Grok, Vera said. He's about to learn. Learn what? Jake asked, though he was starting to get the feeling that he really didn't want to know. The answer came from an unexpected source. Ambassador Zilthak, the station's diplomatic liaison. Zilthak was a Melonian, a species that looked like someone had given an octopus a philosophy degree and a really nice suit. They floated over on their hover disk, tentacles writhing in what Jake had learned was either excitement or impending doom. Ah, Captain Morrison, Zilthak said, their voice carrying the musical quality common to their species. I was wondering when you would encounter our dimensional anomaly. Tell me, have you ever experienced the sensation of losing a significant portion of your skeletal structure? Can't say that I have, Jake replied, though he was starting to suspect this was about to change. Fascinating, Zilthak continued. The experience is said to be quite educational. Also permanent, in most cases. Most cases? Jake asked. Well, Zilthak said, their tentacles curling in what might have been amusement. There was that one fellow who got his kneecap back, eventually. Though I believe it took him 6 months, and a formal apology written in 17 different languages. Jake looked around at the small crowd that had somehow gathered. Grok was consulting his safety protocols. Morris was probably running calculations on the probability of Jake's survival. Zilthak was watching with the kind of academic interest usually reserved for particularly explosive chemistry experiments. And Vera was just standing there looking tired. "You know what?" Jake said, because apparently his brain had decided that now was the perfect time to double down on stupid. "I think you're all trying to scare me. Humans don't just lose body parts by touching other humans. That's not how physics works." "Physics," Vera said softly, "is more of a guideline than a rule where I'm concerned." "Prove it," Jake said. The concourse went quiet. Even the background hum of the station seemed to pause, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. "Captain Morrison," Grok said slowly, "I strongly advise against." "No," Vera interrupted. "It's fine. He wants proof. He's going to get proof." She looked at Jake one more time, and for a moment her expression softened. "Last chance, Captain. Walk away. Find another human to annoy. Go hit on the bartender at Murphy's Cantina. She only breaks noses, and those heal." Jake stepped closer. "Your funeral," Vera said. "Here's the thing about touching dimensional anomalies. It's not like touching a hot stove or grabbing a live wire. With those, you get immediate feedback. Pain, burns, the sudden realization that you've made a terrible mistake. With dimensional anomalies, you get about 3 seconds of thinking everything is fine before reality decides to get creative." Jake reached out and placed his hand on Vera's shoulder. For exactly 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then physics took a coffee break. The first thing Jake noticed was the color. Not a color exactly, but the absence of color, like someone had taken a cosmic eraser to that particular section of the universe. The air around Vera's shoulder shimmered, and Jake felt a sensation like ice water running through his veins. "Ha," he said, which would go down in history as perhaps the most understated response to a dimensional catastrophe ever recorded. The second thing he noticed was the sound. It wasn't loud exactly, but it was wrong. Like the universe itself was having a mild coughing fit. The sort of soft pop that seemed to come from inside his own chest. The third thing he noticed was that his right shoulder felt remarkably loose. Jake looked down at himself, then at Vera, then at the growing crowd of spectators. "Is it just me, or does my shoulder feel weird?" "That would be because you're missing your collarbone," Vera said conversationally. "I'm sorry, what?" "Your collarbone. Right side. It's gone." Jake prodded at his shoulder with his left hand. Sure enough, where there should have been a nice, solid piece of bone connecting his shoulder to his chest, there was just nothing. His shoulder blade moved independently, like a loose door hanging on a single hinge. "Where did it go?" he asked, his voice climbing an octave. "Somewhere else," Vera said. "Probably the same place that pen from the information kiosk ended up when I accidentally bumped into it yesterday." Jake looked at the kiosk. Sure enough, there was a pen-shaped hole in the metal surface, perfectly smooth, as if the pen had simply ceased to exist. "Can you get it back?" Jake asked. "Maybe. Eventually. If you're very lucky and very polite." Jake tried to move his right arm and immediately regretted it. Without his collarbone to anchor his shoulder joint, his arm moved in ways that arms weren't supposed to move. It was like trying to use a marionette with half the strings cut. "This is," Jake said, pausing to consider his words carefully, "suboptimal." "I warned you," Vera said. "You did warn me," Jake agreed. "But when you said body parts, I was thinking more along the lines of fingers or toes. You know, the small stuff." "I don't get to choose which parts disappear," Vera said. "The universe has a sense of humor about these things." Grok approached cautiously, his scanner beeping ominously. "Captain Morrison, according to my readings, you are missing approximately 43 grams of calcium carbonate and various other minerals." "That's my collarbone," Jake said. "Yes," Grok agreed. "Where did you put it?" "I didn't put it anywhere. It just left." Morris chimed in from the nearest speaker. "For the record, Captain Morrison, this is why we have safety protocols. Also, you should probably sit down. Human physiology is not designed to function without certain structural elements. Jake tried to ignore the advice and immediately discovered that Morris was right. His right shoulder was collapsing inward, and his arm was developing an alarming tendency to swing in random directions. He looked like a scarecrow that had been assembled by someone with only a theoretical understanding of human anatomy. "This is embarrassing," Jake muttered. "This is what happens when you don't listen to warning signs," Vera replied. "Though I have to admit, usually people lose something smaller first. A fingernail, maybe a tooth. You went straight for the structural components." "I've always been an overachiever," Jake said, then immediately regretted the joke as his shoulder gave another disturbing wobble. Ambassador Zilthak floated closer, their tentacles writhing with scientific curiosity. "It's fascinating. The bone didn't break or dissolve. It simply isn't. From a dimensional perspective, this is quite remarkable." "From a having bones perspective, it's less remarkable," Jake said. "Indeed," Zilthak agreed. "Though you must admit it's an interesting way to learn about the interconnected nature of human skeletal structure." "I preferred learning about it from books," Jake said. The crowd around them had grown larger, with various species pointing and taking pictures. Jake realized that he was probably about to become the most famous idiot in the galaxy, which was saying something considering the competition. "So," he said to Vera, "what's the next step? Do I file an insurance claim? Report this to the Galactic Health Authority? Start a support group for people missing random bones?" "Next step is you learn some humility," Vera said, "and maybe some respect for warning signs." "Consider me educated," Jake replied. "Can I have my collarbone back now?" Vera smiled for the first time since he'd met her. It was not a comforting smile. "Oh, Captain Morrison," she said, "we're just getting started." The thing about dimensional anomalies, Jake was learning, was that they didn't come with instruction manuals. There was no missing bones for dummies or so you've been dimensionally disrupted, the survivor's guide. There was just Vera, looking at him with the expression of someone who had seen this particular disaster movie too many times. "All right," Jake said, trying to maintain some dignity, while his right arm flopped around like a flag in a hurricane. "I'm going to need some explanations here." "What exactly are you?" "Complicated," Vera said. "That's not an explanation. That's a relationship status." Vera looked around at the crowd that had gathered. Grok was still scanning Jake with his security equipment. Ambassador Zilthak was taking notes on a tablet. Morris was probably calculating the insurance costs. And at least 30 other beings were watching like this was the best entertainment they'd seen all week. "Maybe we should continue this conversation somewhere more private," Vera suggested. "Good idea," Jake agreed. "But I'm going to need help walking. My shoulder is apparently load-bearing, and I'm currently operating without it." Grok stepped forward with something that looked like a medical support harness crossed with a straitjacket. "Standard equipment for beings with compromised structural integrity," he explained. "I'm not compromised," Jake protested as Grok began strapping him into the device. "I'm just temporarily missing some components." "That's literally the definition of compromised," Morris pointed out. The harness was surprisingly comfortable, though Jake suspected that was because it was designed for species with more tentacles than bones. It held his right shoulder in place and gave his arm something to hang from that wasn't just hope and muscle memory. "Better?" Vera asked. "Marginally," Jake replied, "though I'd prefer my original bone-based solution." They made their way to Murphy's Cantina, which was the station's closest approximation to a quiet place for conversation. Murphy himself was a transplanted Irishman who'd somehow ended up running a bar in the middle of galactic space, serving drinks to beings who didn't even have stomachs. He took one look at Jake's harness and shook his head. "Another one?" Murphy asked Vera. "Another one," she confirmed. "What do you mean, another one?" Jake asked. "You're not the first person to ignore my warning signs," Vera said, settling into a booth that had been specially designed for beings with non-standard anatomies. "Though you are the first to lose something quite so essential." Murphy brought over a drink that looked like it was glowing slightly. For the shock, he explained to Jake. It's mostly harmless. Mostly? Jake asked. Well, it might turn your hair blue for a few days, but considering your current situation, that's probably the least of your worries. Jake took a sip and immediately felt his remaining bones tingle in a way that suggested they were happy to still exist. Okay, Vera, time for the full story. What are you, and why do you collect body parts? I don't collect them, Vera said. I don't want them. I can't control it. As for what I am, she paused, looking down at her hands. I'm human. Mostly. But I'm also something else. Something that shouldn't exist in normal space. Define normal, Jake said. Well, for starters, normal humans don't cause localized dimensional instabilities just by existing, Vera replied. Normal humans don't accidentally erase pieces of reality when they touch things. Normal humans don't require warning signs just to function in society. So what happened to you? Jake asked. Vera was quiet for a long moment. Have you ever heard of the Heisenberg Research Station? Jake nearly choked on his drink. The one that disappeared 7 years ago? The one where they were doing experimental dimensional research? That's the one, Vera said. I was a research assistant there. We were working on something called dimensional phase shifting. The idea was to create objects that could exist in multiple dimensional states simultaneously. And let me guess, Jake said, something went wrong. Something went very wrong, Vera confirmed. There was an accident. An explosion. Most of the research team died. But I got caught in the dimensional field when it collapsed. I became what we were trying to create. A being that exists in multiple dimensional states at once. That sounds, Jake paused, trying to find the right words. Actually, that sounds kind of cool. It's not cool, Vera said flatly. It's a nightmare. Do you know what it's like to be afraid of touching another person? To have to wear warning signs just to buy groceries? To know that every handshake, every hug, every moment of human contact could result in someone losing a piece of themselves? Jake looked down at his harness, then back at Vera. I'm starting to get the picture. The worst part, Vera continued, is that I can't control it. I can't turn it off. I can't just decide to be normal for a day. I'm stuck like this, and everyone around me is at risk. But you said maybe you could get my collarbone back, Jake said. How does that work? No. Sometimes, Vera said. If I concentrate really hard, I can reach into the dimensional space where the missing pieces go. It's like, imagine if you dropped your keys into a parallel universe and had to stick your hand through a hole in reality to get them back. That sounds dangerous, Jake said. It is dangerous, Vera agreed. And it doesn't always work. Sometimes the pieces are too far gone. Sometimes they've been absorbed into the dimensional matrix and can't be retrieved. And sometimes? Jake asked. Sometimes, Vera said. If the person who lost the piece is willing to prove they've learned something from the experience, I can bring it back. Jake felt a spark of hope. What kind of proof? Vera smiled, and this time it was slightly less terrifying. That depends on the person. But for you, Captain Morrison, I'm thinking it's going to involve some very public humiliation and a sincere apology. How public? Jake asked. Oh, Vera said. I'm thinking galactic-wide broadcast should do it. Jake's remaining bones seemed to sink a little lower in his body. This is going to be embarrassing, isn't it? Captain Morrison, Vera said, you have no idea. The next morning, Jake woke up in his ship's cramped quarters and immediately remembered why he was wearing a medical harness. His missing collarbone announced itself with every movement, turning simple tasks like getting dressed into exercises and creative problem-solving. Morris, he called out to the station's AI system, which had thoughtfully extended its monitoring network to his ship. Please tell me Vera was joking about the galactic broadcast thing. I'm afraid not, Captain Morrison, Morris replied. Miss Blackwood has been quite specific about her requirements. She's prepared a series of challenges designed to test your character, humility, and basic understanding of personal boundaries. Challenges? What is this, a game show? More like a rehabilitation program, Morris said. Think of it as cosmic community service. Jake managed to get dressed, though his shirt hung oddly on his asymmetrical frame. He made his way back to the main concourse, where he found Vera waiting with what appeared to be a small crowd of spectators and several recording devices. Really? Jake asked. An audience? Educational value, Vera said. If this is going to work, people need to see the consequences of ignoring safety warnings. Ambassador Zilthak floated over, their tentacles writhing with excitement. Captain Morrison, ready for your first challenge? Do I have a choice? Technically, yes, Zilthak said. You could spend the rest of your life with a compromised skeletal structure and become a cautionary tale told in safety training courses throughout the galaxy. What's the first challenge? Jake asked. Simple, Vera said. You're going to spend the next 4 hours working as a greeter at the station's main entrance. Your job is to warn arriving visitors about the importance of following safety protocols. That's it? That's it, Vera confirmed. But there's a catch. You have to be genuinely helpful and polite. No sarcasm, no eye-rolling, no treating people like they're idiots for asking questions. Jake looked around at the crowd of beings who had gathered to watch. This is going to be on the news, isn't it? Several news networks, Morris confirmed. Also, someone started a betting pool on whether you'll make it through the first hour without insulting anyone. What are the odds? 12 to 1 against, Grok rumbled. I may have placed a small wager myself. The next 4 hours were possibly the longest of Jake's life. He stood at the main entrance, harness clearly visible, greeting every arrival with a smile and a warning about the importance of reading safety signs. He helped a family of Zephyrians understand the station's anti-gravity regulations. He patiently explained to a group of Melonian traders why their hover disks needed safety inspections. Most humbling of all, he had to tell his own story at least 50 times. By the end of the 4th hour, he'd gotten it down to a practiced routine. Hi, I'm Captain Jake Morrison. I ignored safety warnings and lost my collarbone. Please learn from my mistake. How was that? He asked Vera when his shift was over. Not terrible, she said, though I noticed you were gritting your teeth by the end. I was being polite, Jake protested. You were, Vera agreed. Which brings us to challenge number 2. Challenge number 2 involved Jake working a shift at the station's information desk, helping lost visitors find their way around. Challenge number 3 was volunteering at the Children's Education Center, where he had to explain basic safety concepts to young beings from various species. By the end of the day, Jake was exhausted, embarrassed, and starting to understand why people found him annoying. He'd always thought of himself as charming and confident. It turned out that what he'd been calling charm was mostly just ignoring other people's discomfort, and what he'd been calling confidence was mostly just not caring about consequences. One more challenge, Vera said as they sat in Murphy's cantina again. This one's the big one. What now? Jake asked. You're going to record a public service announcement, Vera said. A real one. About the importance of respecting boundaries and listening to warnings. It's going to be broadcast throughout the galaxy. And if I do this, you'll give me my collarbone back? If you do this sincerely, Vera said. And if you actually mean what you say, then yes. Jake looked at her for a long moment. You know, I've been thinking about something. Why do you stay here? On the station, I mean. You could go anywhere. Find some isolated planet where you don't have to worry about touching anyone. I tried that, Vera said quietly. Spent 3 years on a research station in the Outer Rim. Just me and some automated systems. Do you know what I learned? What? That isolation isn't living. It's just existing. People need other people, even when it's dangerous, even when it's complicated. So you came back to civilization. I came back to try to find a way to be around people without hurting them, Vera said. It's not easy. But it's better than giving up. Jake thought about this. The public service announcement. What do you want me to say? The truth, Vera said. Whatever that is for you. The next morning, Jake stood in front of the cameras, still wearing his harness, still missing his collarbone, still feeling like an idiot. But for the first time in days, he knew exactly what he wanted to say. Hi, he began. I'm Captain Jake Morrison, and I'm an idiot. The recording session had gone better than expected, mostly because Jake had finally stopped trying to be clever and started trying to be honest. The public service announcement was simple. A man admitting he'd been wrong, explaining what he'd learned, and asking people to be better than he had been. Not bad, Vera said as they reviewed the recording. Though you still look like you're in pain. I am in pain, Jake replied. Do you know how hard it is to maintain good posture when you're missing structural elements? I'm about to find out, Vera said. She stood up and walked to the center of the small recording studio. The various alien technicians and spectators moved back automatically, giving her the usual 6-foot buffer zone. Jake watched from his chair, suddenly nervous. What are you doing? He asked. Getting your collarbone back, Vera said. Try to hold still. She closed her eyes and extended her hands. The air around her began to shimmer, that same not quite color that Jake had seen when he'd first touched her. The shimmering spread outward, creating a bubble of distorted space around her. This is the hard part, she said, her voice strangely distant. I have to reach into the dimensional space where displaced matter ends up. It's like imagine sticking your hand into a blender made of pure mathematics. That sounds awful, Jake said. It is awful, Vera agreed. But sometimes it's worth it. The shimmering intensified, and Jake felt a strange tugging sensation in his chest. It was like someone was trying to pull his heart out through his rib cage, except in a good way. If that made any sense, which it probably didn't. There, Vera said, opening her eyes, found it. Finding. She reached into the distorted space around her and pulled out what looked like nothing at all. But as she moved her hands toward Jake, the nothing began to take shape. First as a vague outline, then as a translucent suggestion of bone, and finally as a solid, familiar piece of human anatomy. This might feel weird, she warned. Weirder than not having a collarbone? Jake asked. Much weirder. Much weirder. She pressed the recovered bone against Jake's shoulder, and reality reasserted itself with a sensation like being struck by lightning made of relief. Jake felt his shoulder snap back into proper alignment, his arm regain its full range of motion, and his posture straighten for the first time in days. How does it feel? Vera asked. Jake moved his arm experimentally. Like I'm a complete person again, he said. Though I have to ask, is it exactly the same collarbone? Because it feels a little. A little what? Tingly, like it's vibrating. Vera looked slightly embarrassed. That's a side effect. Items that spend time in dimensional space sometimes come back with minor alterations. The tingling should fade in a few weeks. And if it doesn't, then you'll have the galaxy's only interdimensional collarbone, Vera said, which is either very cool or very concerning, depending on your perspective. Jake stood up and removed the medical harness, flexing his newly restored shoulder. I have to admit, this is not how I expected this week to go. Most people don't expect to lose major bones, Vera said. It's not usually on anyone's schedule. So what happens now? Jake asked. Do I go back to my normal life? Do you go back to yours? Do we pretend this never happened? That depends, Vera said. Have you actually learned anything from this experience? Jake thought about the question seriously. I've learned that warning signs exist for a reason. I've learned that my definition of charming was actually just annoying. I've learned that ignoring other people's boundaries isn't confidence, it's selfishness. And And I've learned that sometimes the most interesting people are the ones who come with complications. Vera smiled. That's very philosophical, Captain Morrison. I'm a philosophical guy, Jake said. Also, I was wondering if you'd like to have dinner sometime. Somewhere public, with a nice long table between us. A long table? 6 feet minimum, Jake said. I'm a quick learner. You know, Vera said, I think I'd like that. Though I should warn you, dating me comes with certain challenges. Such as? Well, for starters, I can't hold hands, or hug, or engage in any of the traditional physical expressions of affection that most people expect in a relationship. That's okay, Jake said. I'm pretty sure I can find other ways to be affectionate. I'm creative like that. And if you ever ignore my boundaries again, you might lose something more important than a collarbone, Vera added. More important than a collarbone? Jake asked. Like what? Your spleen, Vera said. Or your sense of humor, or your ability to appreciate good coffee. My ability to appreciate coffee? Jake looked genuinely horrified. That's a thing you can take? I once accidentally erased someone's capacity for enjoying music, Vera said. They got it back eventually, but it took months of music therapy. Note to self, Jake said. Maintain respectful distance at all times. Good plan, Vera agreed. As they walked out of the recording studio together, maintaining a careful 6-foot separation, Jake realized that his brush with dimensional instability had taught him something important. Not just about safety protocols or personal boundaries, but about the difference between confidence and arrogance, between charming and obnoxious, between taking risks and being reckless. His public service announcement went viral within hours, not because it was particularly clever or funny, but because it was honest. Jake Morrison, the cocky space trader who thought he was too cool for safety warnings, admitting he'd been wrong and asking people to be better than he had been. The response was overwhelming. Messages from beings across the galaxy, sharing their own stories of ignoring warnings and facing consequences. Safety instructors requesting copies of the recording for their training programs. Even a few marriage proposals, though those were mostly from species with unusual mating rituals. So, Jake said to Vera, as they sat in Murphy's cantina a week later, still maintaining their careful distance. I've been thinking about my cargo routes. I was wondering if you'd be interested in traveling with me. I could use a safety consultant. A safety consultant? Vera asked. Someone to remind me not to touch things I shouldn't touch, Jake said. Also, I think you'd be good at negotiations. Nothing says take this seriously like a person who comes with their own warning signs. Vera considered this. It might be nice to travel again. I've been stuck on this station for 3 years, ever since the incident with the Zephyrian diplomatic mission. What happened with the Zephyrian diplomatic mission? I accidentally made their ambassador's ceremonial headdress non-Euclidean. It took 6 months and a team of theoretical physicists to fix it. Non-Euclidean? The feathers existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously. Very awkward during formal presentations. Jake laughed. See? You're exactly the kind of person I need on my crew. Someone who can make headwear mathematically impossible. I'm not sure that's a selling point, Vera said. Are you kidding? Do you know how many cargo disputes I could win with that kind of leverage? Vera raised an eyebrow. You want to use my dimensional instability as a negotiation tactic? I want to use your dimensional instability as a last resort, Jake clarified. Most of the time, I'm hoping people will just be reasonable. But it's nice to know I have options. That's a terrible plan, Vera said. I have a lot of terrible plans, Jake admitted. But I'm getting better at recognizing them before I implement them. Growth. Growth, Vera agreed. Though I should mention, if I'm going to be your safety consultant, I'll need to review your entire operation. Ship maintenance, cargo handling procedures, crew safety protocols, insurance policies. Insurance policies? Jake, you just spent a week without a collarbone because you ignored a warning label. I guarantee your insurance paperwork is a disaster. Jake winced. It's not that bad. When was the last time you updated your hazardous materials certifications? I have hazardous materials certifications? Oh, this is going to be fun, Vera said. But she was smiling. I haven't had a project this challenging since I tried to help that Centaurian merchant organize his quantum inventory system. What happened to the Centaurian merchant? His cargo bay now exists in a permanent state of superposition. He's either incredibly wealthy or completely bankrupt, depending on when you observe him. That sounds problematic. It is. But he's learned to embrace the uncertainty. Says it makes life more interesting. Jake looked at Vera across their carefully maintained 6-foot gap and realized that uncertainty had become the most interesting part of his own life. A week ago, he'd been a predictable smuggler with predictable problems. Now he was a man with an interdimensional collarbone, sitting across from a woman who could accidentally erase his appreciation for coffee, planning a business partnership that would probably involve more theoretical physics than he was comfortable with. So he said, "When do we leave?" "As soon as you pass a basic safety certification exam," Vera said. "I'm not getting on a ship with someone who doesn't know the difference between a Class 3 and Class 4 containment field." "I know the difference," Jake protested. "What's the difference?" "One of them is more dangerous than the other." Vera sighed. "We're going to need a bigger study guide." As they sat there, planning their improbable partnership, Jake's collarbone gave a little tingle. Just a reminder that some mistakes came with permanent consequences, but also that some consequences were worth living with. Especially when they came with the possibility of something better than what you'd had before. "You know," Jake said, "I think this is going to work out fine." "That's very optimistic," Vera said. "I'm an optimistic guy," Jake replied. "Also, I have a vibrating collarbone. Hard to be pessimistic when you're that unique." Vera laughed, and the sound was worth every moment of the past week's confusion. "Jake Morrison, I think you might actually be learning." "I'm trying," Jake said. "It's harder than it looks." "The best things usually are," Vera said. "But I think you're worth the effort." As they finished their drinks and prepared to leave, maintaining their careful distance, of course Jake realized that he'd finally found something worth being careful about. Not just his own safety, but someone else's comfort, someone else's boundaries, someone else's trust. It was a start.